The golden light of a Wyoming sunset cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Beatrice Turner stood at the edge of Sweetwater Creek, her shoulders slumping with the weight of her failures. 1887 had been a cruel year. Everything she'd left to pursue fortune in the goldfields of Montana, independence from a town that knew her only as Poor Bee, had come to nothing. She wore the same threadbare dress she'd departed in 2 years ago, though now it hung loose on her hunger-thinned frame. Only her pride remained intact as she trudged toward the ranch that had once been her home, wondering if Zachary Rowe still waited, as he'd promised. Beatrice paused at the wooden gate marking the entrance to the Lazy R, her fingers tracing the familiar carvings Zach had whittled into the post. 2 years ago, she'd scorned his proposal, convinced that a lifetime as a rancher's wife would suffocate her dreams. "I need to make something of myself first," she told him, her voice brimming with the confidence of youth. "When I return, I'll bring enough gold to help you build the grandest ranch in the territory." Now she returned with nothing but calloused hands and a heart heavy with regret. The creak of leather and the soft clop of hoofbeats made her turn. There atop his chestnut mare sat Zach, tall and broad-shouldered as ever, though his face had weathered further under the relentless western sun. His dusty hat shadowed eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness. "Beatrice," he said, her name a whisper carried on the evening breeze. She fought the urge to run to him, to bury her face against his chest as she had so many times before. Instead, she squared her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I came back with nothing," she said, the admission burning her throat. The claim was worthless. "Everything I worked for," her voice broke, and she gestured helplessly at her worn satchel, containing little more than a change of clothes and a battered tin cup. Zach dismounted in one fluid motion, boots stirring the dust as he approached. She braced herself for his judgment, his righteous anger, or worst of all, his pity. Instead, he took her hands in his, those familiar calloused fingers sending warmth through her chilled bones. "I saved everything for us," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every penny, every plan, every dream." Beatrice blinked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "You waited. I'd wait forever, Bee." His smile broke across his face like sunrise. "Welcome home." Before she could respond, he pulled her into an embrace that melted 2 years of hardship from her bones. Over his shoulder, she saw the ranch house, modest but solid, with smoke curling from its chimney. A home she'd once been too restless to appreciate. As dusk deepened around them, Zach led her inside, his hand never leaving hers. The interior was just as she remembered: simple wooden furniture, the scent of pine, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "I should have written," Beatrice said, sinking into a chair at the table. "I meant to, but each time I picked up a pen, I couldn't find the words to tell you I'd failed." Zach set a steaming cup of coffee before her. "You didn't fail, Bee. You followed your heart. That's all I ever wanted for you." She wrapped her fingers around the mug, savoring its warmth. "The mining camp was nothing like I imagined. So many desperate people, all clawing for the same dream. I worked until my hands bled, but the gold, it wasn't there." She swallowed hard. "By the time I admitted defeat, I'd barely enough money for passage home." "And here you are," Zach said simply. "Here I am," she echoed, "with nothing to show for my grand adventure." "Nothing," he raised an eyebrow. "You've seen more of the world than most folks around here ever will." "That's something?" His lack of judgment disarmed her. The Zach she remembered had been passionate, sometimes hot-headed. This measured calm was new. "You've changed," she observed. 2 years will do that." He leaned against the wooden counter, arms crossed. "Ranch life teaches patience. The land doesn't rush, nor does the cattle. I've learned to move at their pace." She noticed then the subtle changes in him: broader shoulders, deeper lines around his eyes, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. At 26, he'd grown into himself, no longer the impulsive young cowboy who'd proposed with wild promises and grander gestures. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Show me what you've saved." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Tomorrow, tonight, you need rest." Despite her protests, he insisted, showing her to the spare room where a clean quilt covered a narrow bed. My sister Emma stays here sometimes, he explained. She left some clothes that might fit you. The consideration in this gesture nearly undid her. Zach, tomorrow be. He hesitated at the doorway. I'm glad you're back, whatever your reasons. After he left, Beatrice sat on the bed, running her hands over the hand-stitched quilt. The room smelled of lavender and clean linen, so different from the musty boarding houses and tent camps of the last 2 years. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she allowed herself to cry not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of being somewhere safe. Morning broke with the familiar sounds of ranch life, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the metallic clang of tools. Beatrice dressed in borrowed clothes, a simple skirt and blouse that hung loose on her frame but felt cleaner than anything she'd worn in months. She found Zach in the kitchen, cooking breakfast over the cast iron stove. The domesticity of the scene struck her. This man who could break wild horses and drive cattle hundreds of miles, carefully turning strips of bacon in a skillet. I half expected to wake and find this all a dream, she admitted, lingering in the doorway. He glanced up, a slow smile spreading across his face. No dream, just bacon that'll burn if I don't pay attention. They ate in comfortable silence, the tension of the previous evening giving way to something gentler. When they finished, Zach stood and extended his hand. Come on. I've got something to show you. He led her outside, where his mare and another horse, a dappled gray, waited, saddled and ready. Emma's horse, he explained, helping her mount. Figure you remember how to ride. The familiar motion of settling into the saddle brought back memories of countless rides across these plains. Some things you don't forget, she said, gathering the reins. They rode for nearly an hour, cresting hills and crossing streams that Beatrice remembered from childhood. The land was greener than she recalled, the grass taller. You've expanded, she observed, noting new fence lines stretching toward the horizon. Bought the Davison place when old Joe passed. His boys didn't want the land. Zach pointed toward a distant ridge. That stream never runs dry, even in the worst droughts, makes the whole section prime grazing. Beatrice heard the pride in his voice. You've done well. I've worked hard, he corrected, and been lucky with the weather. 2 good years back to back can make all the difference. As they rode, he pointed out improvements, new cattle breeds brought in from back east, experimental crops in some fields, even a small orchard of apple trees sheltered in a valley. They won't bear fruit for years, he acknowledged when she expressed surprise at the orchard. But I'm thinking long-term. The words hung between them. Long-term, a future stretching beyond the next season, the next year. Finally, they crested a hill, and Zach reined his horse to a stop. Below them stretched a valley, greener than the surrounding plains, with a small creek winding through it. Near its center stood the timber frame of a house larger than Zach's current cabin, with wide windows facing the morning sun. What's this? Beatrice asked, though something in her heart already knew. Our house, he said simply. Or it will be. I started it 6 months after you left, worked on it when I could spare time from the ranch. Beatrice stared at the half-built structure, emotions churning. You built this for us. Even after I left, he shrugged, a gesture that failed to mask the vulnerability in his eyes. I told you I'd wait. I meant it. They dismounted and walked among the timber frame. Zach showed her where each room would be a large kitchen with space for a proper table, bedrooms with windows to catch the breeze, even a small room he'd planned as a library. You remembered I love books, she said softly, touching one of the posts. I remember everything about you, B. His voice was matter of fact, but the words themselves were anything but. Standing there, surrounded by the bones of a house built on nothing but faith in her return, Beatrice felt the full weight of what she'd walked away from and what she might still have, if she was brave enough to reach for it. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Zach's hand found hers, warm and steady. It's not about deserving, it's about love. The simplicity of his declaration left her speechless. They stood together among the timber frames, hands linked as clouds sailed overhead. After they returned to the ranch, Beatrice insisted on helping with the day's chores. Though her muscles protested after the long ride, there was satisfaction in physical labor feeding chickens, gathering eggs, helping Zach repair a section of fence. "You've gotten handy with tools," he observed as she confidently hammered a nail. "Mining camps aren't known for their chivalry," she replied. "You either learn to fix your own shelter or sleep under the stars." As the sun began its descent, they sat on the porch, watching distant thunderheads build over the mountains. Beatrice felt Zach watching her more than the clouds, his gaze a tangible presence. "You haven't asked why I really came back," she said finally. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "It wasn't just that the gold ran out. I could have found work in town, stayed up north." She met his eyes directly. "I came back because every night I'd look at the stars and wonder if you were seeing the same ones. Because every triumph felt hollow without you to share it, and every setback twice as hard." His expression remained carefully neutral, though she saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped his knee. "I came back because I realized no amount of gold could be worth what I left behind." Her voice broke. "But I understand if it's too late, if you've built all this out of some sense of obligation to a promise made before I betrayed your trust." "Betrayed?" He shook his head, cutting her off. "You didn't betray anything, Bea. You followed your dream. I may not have liked it, but I respected it. And now," she asked, heart in her throat, "now I respect the woman who had the courage to chase that dream and the wisdom to know when it was time to come home." He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "The question isn't whether I still want you, Beatrice. It's whether you're staying this time." The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. "I'm staying," she said. "If you'll have me, I'm staying for good." The kiss that followed wasn't there first, but it felt like it tentative at first, then deepening with the urgency of 2 years' separation. When they finally parted, Beatrice felt dizzy, anchored only by Zach's strong hands at her waist. "I should warn you," he said, his voice rough. "I'm not the same man you left. I've got plans now, bigger than just scraping by season to season. I aim to build something lasting." "I'm not the same woman either," she replied. "I've seen enough of the world to know what matters." In the days that followed, they fell into a rhythm of work and conversation. Beatrice shared stories of her time away, the colorful characters she'd met, the harsh realities of the mining camp, the breathtaking beauty of Montana's mountains. Zach listened intently, occasionally asking questions but never judging. In turn, he told her of his struggles and successes in her absence, the brutal winter that nearly wiped out his herd, the railway deal that finally brought prosperity, his sister Emma's marriage to the town doctor. "I've been invited to Sunday dinner at their place," he mentioned one evening as they sat by the fire. "Emma's dying to see you. She always said you'd come back." "She did?" Beatrice asked, surprised. Emma had been barely 16 when she left. "Said you were too smart not to realize what you had here." His smile was affectionate. "My sister's quite the know-it-all these days." The prospect of facing townsfolk who had surely gossiped about her departure made Beatrice nervous, but Zach's quiet confidence bolstered her courage. On Sunday, she wore her best borrowed dress and rode beside him into Sweetwater Creek. Emma's welcome was enthusiastic, any potential awkwardness dissolved in her warm embrace. "I knew it," she exclaimed, pulling Beatrice into the neat house she shared with Dr. James Wilson. "I told Zach just last month you'd be back before the first snow." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Emma chattering about town happenings and her husband James sharing medical anecdotes that had them all laughing. Beatrice felt a pang, realizing how much she'd missed simple human connection during her solitary quest. As they prepared to leave, Emma pressed a package into Beatrice's hands. "I saved these for you," she explained. "Figured you might need them when you returned." Later, unwrapping the bundle in the privacy of her room, Beatrice found several dresses, carefully altered to her size. The gesture brought tears to her eyes, evidence that she hadn't been forgotten, that people had believed in her return when she herself had doubted it was possible. The next morning, Beatrice woke with renewed purpose. Donning one of Emma's dresses, she prepared breakfast before Zach rose, filling the kitchen with the scent of fresh biscuits and coffee. "What's the occasion?" he asked, appearing in the doorway with hair still mussed from sleep. No occasion, she replied, just wanted to be useful. After breakfast, she surprised him again. I'd like to help with the house, she said. The new one, I know I can't do the heavy construction, but surely there's planning to be done, details to consider. His face lit up. I'd like that very much. They spent the afternoon at the building site, Beatrice sketching ideas for the interior while Zach worked on reinforcing the frame. As the sun began to set, they sat together on a pile of lumber, reviewing her drawings. This is good, he said, studying her design for built-in bookshelves in the library. Better than what I'd planned. We could add a window seat here, she suggested, pointing to the south wall, for reading on winter afternoons. The ease with which they collaborated filled her with quiet joy. This was partnership, something she'd never found in the competitive world of the mining camps, where every person looked out only for themselves. As twilight deepened around them, Zach set aside the drawings and took her hands in his. "Marry me, Beatrice," he said, the words so similar to those he'd spoken 2 years ago, yet weighted now with shared experience and deeper understanding. "Are you sure?" she asked, though her heart had already answered, "More sure than I've ever been of anything." His eyes held hers steadily. "I loved you when you left, loved you while you were gone, and love you even more now that you've returned. Nothing about that will change." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zachary Rowe." The kiss that sealed their engagement was witnessed only by the emerging stars and a curious jackrabbit that darted past the timber frame of their future home. They married 3 weeks later in Sweetwater Creek's small church, a simple ceremony attended by Emma and James, a handful of neighboring ranchers, and to Beatrice's surprise, several townsfolk who welcomed her back without judgment. She wore a dress of cream-colored muslin that Emma had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. "I, Zachary, take you, Beatrice, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and strong. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When it was her turn, Beatrice's voice trembled slightly, but her conviction was absolute. "I, Beatrice, take you, Zachary, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The gold band he slipped onto her finger was simple but perfectly fitted, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "I had it made in Cheyenne last year," he admitted when she commented on this. "Carried it with me every day since." Such unwavering faith humbled her. As they rode home together, husband and wife now, the words still new and wondrous, Beatrice vowed silently to prove worthy of it. The ranch house that had once been just Zach's became theirs in subtle ways, her books appearing on shelves, wildflowers in jars on the table, the quilt from her childhood spread across their shared bed. Physical intimacy came naturally, both of them discovering each other with tender curiosity that quickly blazed into passion. "I never stopped dreaming about this," Zach confessed one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About you here with me." "Reality is better than dreams," she replied, nestling closer to his warmth. As autumn painted the plains in gold and russet, they worked side by side, harvesting the small kitchen garden, preparing the ranch for winter, continuing construction on their new home when weather permitted. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them together, their partnership strengthening with each solved problem. "We'll need to butcher that old rooster before he terrorizes any more hens," Beatrice declared one morning, nursing a scratch from the belligerent bird. "I've been saying that for weeks," Zach laughed, "but you insisted he deserved another chance." "Well, he exhausted his chances when he drew blood," she retorted. "I'll pluck him myself." Such domestic debates filled their days with easy laughter, a counterbalance to the harder aspects of ranch life: the sick calf that didn't survive despite their care, the early frost that damaged part of their late harvest, the wolf pack that took down one of their yearlings. "This is the part they don't tell you about in storybooks," Beatrice observed after they'd spent a miserable day repairing fences in freezing rain. "The happily ever after with mud up to your knees." Zach pulled her close, both of them soaked and shivering. Would you trade it? She considered the question seriously, thinking of the comfortable town life she might have had if she'd married the banker's son who'd courted her before Zach, or the independence she'd sought in the mining camps. Not for anything, she answered truthfully. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the plains in white silence. Construction on the new house paused, but Zach had managed to complete the exterior walls and roof before winter set in. Sometimes they rode out just to stand inside the shell of rooms, planning where furniture would go, imagining future Christmases and summer evenings. We could be in by spring, Zach estimated, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. If we work through the winter on the interior whenever weather allows. Beatrice nodded, though privately she wondered if they should wait a bit longer. She hadn't told him yet about the subtle changes in her body, the tenderness, the fatigue, the peculiar aversion to the smell of coffee she'd once loved. She wanted to be certain before sharing news that would change everything. A week before Christmas, she received confirmation in the form of morning sickness that left her pale and shaky. When Zach found her leaning against the washbasin, concern immediately furrowed his brow. "You're sick," he stated, pressing a hand to her forehead. "No fever, though." "Not sick," she corrected, a smile breaking through her discomfort. "Just expecting." His expression transformed, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension, then pure joy. "A baby, our baby," she nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace. "When?" he asked, setting her carefully back down as if she might break. "Summer, I think. July, perhaps." His hand moved reverently to her still flat stomach. "I never dared hope for so much so soon." Christmas that year was intimate and joyful, celebrated with a small pine tree cut from their land and decorated with paper stars Beatrice crafted during long evenings. They exchanged modest gifts, a new leather-bound journal for her, a hand-tooled belt for him, but their greatest present was the secret knowledge of the life growing between them. Winter stretched long and harsh, testing their endurance with blizzards that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. They passed evenings reading aloud to each other adventure tales for him, poetry for her, and planning for both the new house and the baby. "If it's a boy," Zach mused one night as they lay entwined beneath heavy quilts, "we could name him after my father." "And if it's a girl," Beatrice prompted. "Something strong but beautiful," he decided. Like her mother. By March, the worst of winter had passed, and Beatrice's condition was obvious even beneath loose clothing. They resumed work on the house with renewed urgency, hiring 2 men from town to help with the heavier labor while Beatrice supervised interior details. "The woodwork in this room needs to be smoother," she instructed one of the workers, running her hand over a rough door frame. "Little hands will find every splinter." The man nodded respectfully, though she caught the amused glance he exchanged with his partner. At 24, she was young to be so authoritative, but pregnancy had given her a new confidence. This house would be perfect for her child, whatever it took. April brought renewal to the land, green shoots pushing through soil, calves wobbling beside their mothers, wildflowers dotting the meadows. Beatrice's body blossomed too, her curves fuller, her skin glowing despite occasional discomfort. "You've never been more beautiful," Zach told her one evening as she braided her hair before the mirror, frowning at her changing reflection. "I'm as big as a barn," she protested. "Perfect size," he countered, dropping a kiss on her shoulder. "Exactly right." In May, they moved into their new home, though some finishes remained incomplete. The library shelves Beatrice had designed stood ready for books, the window seat cushioned with fabric Emma had helped her select. The kitchen boasted a proper stove and enough space for a table that could seat 8 for when our family grows, Zach explained. The baby's room adjoined theirs, painted a soft yellow that caught the morning light. A cradle that had belonged to Zach's family stood ready, refinished by his careful hands. "My mother would have loved you," he told Beatrice as they stood in the doorway, surveying the peaceful space. "She always said I needed someone with spirit." "Tell me about her again," Beatrice requested, settling into the rocking chair that was his latest gift to her. As spring melted into summer, Beatrice's mobility decreased, but her involvement in ranch life continued. She kept meticulous records of cattle births and weather patterns, managed correspondence with buyers, and directed the planting of an expanded vegetable garden from the shade of the porch. "You're supposed to be resting," Zach admonished when he found her kneading bread dough one sweltering afternoon. "I'll rest when I'm tired," she replied stubbornly. "Idleness makes the days longer." Their baby arrived on a stormy July night, heralded by thunder that rattled the new house's windows. Dr. Wilson arrived just in time, summoned by a ranch hand who'd ridden through the downpour. "She's doing well," he assured Zach, who paced the hallway like a caged cougar. First babies often take their time. After hours of labor that tested Beatrice's endurance to its limits, the fierce cry of their daughter filled the room. Small but perfectly formed, with a shock of dark hair and her father's determined chin, Elizabeth Rose Rowe entered the world as the storm cleared and dawn broke over the plains. "She's magnificent," Zach whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "Look what we made, Bea." Exhausted but radiant, Beatrice watched her husband cradle their child with hands that could break a wild horse yet touch the tiny girl with exquisite gentleness. "Worth everything," she murmured, "every step that led us here." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Elizabeth Lizzie to her doting parents grew into a spirited child with her mother's curiosity and her father's steady determination. A brother, Samuel, joined the family 2 years later, completing their circle. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Beatrice's practical intelligence complemented Zach's instinctive understanding of the land, creating an operation that neighbors came to respect and emulate. They weathered droughts and market fluctuations, always finding a way forward together. On the 5th anniversary of her return, Zach surprised Beatrice with a small gold locket. Inside was not a portrait, as she expected, but a tiny nugget of gold. "From the Montana Territory," he explained. "I wrote to some contacts up there last year, asked them to send something from the area where you'd been." She fingered the small piece of metal that had once represented all her dreams. "It seems so insignificant now." "Not insignificant," he corrected. "Just part of the journey that brought you home." As twilight settled over their land, they stood on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and prairie grass, a perfume more precious than any exotic fragrance. "If you could go back," Zach asked, his arm warm around her waist, "would you still leave?" Beatrice considered the question seriously, as she had every time it crossed her mind over the years. "Yes," she answered finally, "because I needed to discover for myself what truly mattered. I needed to lose everything to understand what everything really meant." He nodded, accepting her truth as he always had. "And what does it mean? Everything?" She gestured to the scene before them, their children laughing, their home solid against the darkening sky, the land stretching toward the horizon. "This, us, not gold or adventure or even independence. Just love, freely given and freely returned." "I saved everything for us," he repeated, the words that had welcomed her home 5 years ago. "And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful you did," she replied, turning in his arms to kiss him beneath the first stars of evening. Behind them, the lamps in their home cast golden light across the porch, a beacon in the vastness of the Wyoming plains, a testament to patience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of a love strong enough to wait.